Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 martinis coming up.
So great to have you with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We have good, we have mixed, and we have crazy martinis for you today. And Jim, I don't know if we got as much snow in the D.C. area as we were supposed to. We certainly got a bunch. And as usual, D.C.'s right on the freeze thaw line. So it's never the light, fluffy stuff. It's the heavier stuff. But props to Mrs. Columbus. She and I were out there shoveling, and then she got our kids, along with a bunch of other neighborhood kids, to shovel out some of our neighbors by promising them cookies. Mrs. Columbus has some pretty shrewd street smarts. Hopefully things were as effective in your neighborhood as well.
Greg, do you want to hear the single biggest and clearest sign that Donald Trump is president of the United States? The Biden era is over, and this is a new and different. We have turned the page, and the federal government operates completely differently than just a month ago. It's a sign that was a 2-hour delay from the Office of Personnel Management today, not a full day off. The Office of Personnel Management's instructions for federal workers in the D.C. area was increasingly starting to emulate that of Fairfax County Public Schools, who, as I frequently say, are metaphorical snowflakes about literal snowflakes. Look, this was real snow. Not going to, there was a couple inches out there. DC drivers are notoriously bad, but they got a decent job of going out clearing the streets pretty quickly. Streets, even in my neighborhood, as I'm looking out the window right now, it's been cleared. So everybody went into work 2 hours late, and federal workers are actually working on a day when there was snow on the ground, which is not the way it's been for much of the past 4 years.
Or even longer. Yeah, that was, I remember when Obama first came in and there was a snow day and he's like, what's wrong with you people in Chicago? We don't close schools for this. And he got pounded by everybody in the local area. How dare you tell us we can't have our snow days?
Federal workers love their snow. Like, here's how kids love snow days and here's how federal workers do, right?
That's exactly it. That is exactly it. All right. Well, speaking of places that get a lot of snow, let's head to my home state of Michigan for our good martini. And this is obviously very early, so take that all with appropriate grains of salt. But, you know, one of the things we just learned a couple of weeks ago is that Gary Peters is not running for a third term to the U.S. Senate. He's a 2-term Democrat. And of course, as we saw in November, Mike Rogers came this close, just a whisker of winning that Senate seat for Republicans. It would have been the first GOP Senate win since 1994. But no, Alyssa Slotkin ends up winning by a slight margin. But now, of course, Rogers' name is being thrown out there again as the Senate seat comes open. I think he's going to take a look at it. I don't know that he said a whole lot about it yet. We know that Pete Buttigieg is seriously looking at it, and he's ruled out a run for governor. But now an Epic MRA poll shows that 47% of respondents would plan to vote for Mike Rogers and 41% would be in favor of Pete Buttigieg. 12% were undecided. Now, Pete Buttigieg, for some reason in Michigan, I know he's only lived there for about 15 minutes, doesn't have a very strong name recognition. You would think, given the high-profile jobs he's had lately, that wouldn't be the case, but apparently it is. So he could potentially grow, but this is going to fall largely along partisan lines. But according to the poll, 47-41 in favor of Mike Rogers. And in the governor's race, which is also open, we've got a 3-way race, which is pretty tight, dead even, in fact, between the Republican and the Democrat. That is Jocelyn Benson, the likely Democratic nominee, who's currently Secretary of State, 31%. Dick DeVos, who lost the 2006 governor's race to Jennifer Granholm by 14 points, is at 31%. I would consider him an underdog again. The wild card here is Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, who's running as an independent. He's at 24%. So, Jim, when you look at the map for 2026, it's largely status quo. The two toss-ups, according to 270 to win, is Michigan and Georgia, where John Ossoff is up in Georgia, and Michigan, obviously, as we said, is an open seat. Democrats might have a shot in a couple of states like North Carolina, where Tillis barely hung on a few years ago. That's slightly in the Republicans' favor. And then, of course, you got Susan Collins up in Maine, where Democrats always think they have a good chance. So even if everything goes right for the Democrats, Republicans would still have the majority. But you have to think that the Republicans are going to put a whole lot of money into Georgia and Michigan. And if they've got a proven competitive candidate, that's a pretty good head start. But we'll see what Rogers decides.
All right. So first of all, for all the listeners out there who are like, oh, God, the Three Martini Lunch podcast has now become a Michigan politics focused podcast. No, Greg did not put me up to this. Michigan is just a really important state at the presidential level, Senate level. The gubernatorial race looks like it's going to be super competitive. And almost every cycle, there's a couple of House races that are pretty competitive in there. So it's just a state that matters a lot. Secondly, when Greg calls it the Epic MRA poll, it's that's the name of the company. It's a big deal, but we're not saying it's an epic MRA poll. It's the Epic MRA company that's doing this. Look, you figured, based on past history, this thing would start as a toss-up or maybe a slight lean Democrat. So, and again, Rogers hasn't announced he's running, which is kind of an important, step in the process. But, the guy who ran for it last time, certainly you'd figure he might be interested in taking another shot at the job. And being up 6 is not bad. That's not a bad place to start from. And could Buttigieg improve the numbers? Sure, it's real early, but first of all, we'd expect his name idea to be high as he was just running for the office, and I bet you some of the yard signs aren't even all down, right? I mean, he's so the people who like him still like him, and Buttigieg has some work to do. And just in that governor's race, you kind of you never quite know when there's going to be a significant independent factor there, and who's it going to steal more votes from. I think if you're DeVos, you feel pretty good about this, the fact that it's a tie with this in there. And you mentioned DeVos didn't win in 2006. 2006 obviously was a brutal year for Republicans. Any year where Lynn Swann of the Pittsburgh Steelers can run for governor of Pittsburgh and not come close is a sign it's a really tough year for that. And just one last note on the issue of potentially competitive Senate races. Michael Graham, who runs NH Journal, New Hampshire Journal. I assume the NH is for New Hampshire. But anyway, Jeanne Shaheen, the, I believe, 4-term incumbent Democrat, really has not been raising money the way you would expect for a person who wants to run for another term. She hasn't said anything. It's kind of the assumption that she's running for a re-election, but it's not unthinkable you could have an open seat Senate race in New Hampshire, and that would be another one that would probably be competitive for a Republican pickup. So my guess is Democrats are really hoping Jeanne Shaheen likes where she is and is just going to get out of the stick about fundraising in the next year.
Oh, that could be very interesting because Jeanne Shaheen beat Senator Sununu in 2008, and you know who doesn't have a full-time job at the moment is former Governor Chris Sununu. So he could be in line for that. I'm sure he will get the rousing endorsement of Anderson Cooper if he decides to throw his hat into the ring after what happened yesterday on CNN. But I would think if Sununu were to get in, that could be another potential pickup because he was pretty popular as governor of New Hampshire.
Sununu would be heavily favored, I suspect, in an open seat race, mostly because he was the 3rd or 4th guest on the history of this podcast.
That's
right?
a big feather in your cap. Yes, he'll be.
And
that'll
really,
be the centerpiece of his campaign.
Have we interviewed any other person who's been elected office? I mean, Lieberman had long since retired.
Yeah, no, I think he's an incumbent we've actually interviewed. Yeah.
There you go. So like that, if that doesn't convince voters, nothing else will. He did win re-election after he appeared with us. So, But I believe they reelect the governor every 20 minutes up in New Hampshire. So, or at least
every 2 years. Yeah. Vermont, New Hampshire still do it every 2 years. Decades ago, just about every state did it every 2 years, but those are the only two that still do it that way. All right. Quick Dick DeVos story. First of all, he and his family are very well known in West Michigan. His father and Jay Van Andel founded Amway. They have been incredibly generous philanthropically, children's hospitals, all sorts of other charities, millions and millions of dollars. But Dick DeVos, the son, was in Washington for something during my early days at Radio America. And since I was a Hillsdale grad, my boss says, why don't you come in at this particular time so we can introduce you to Dick DeVos and let him know that you're a Hillsdale grad. And I think that'll impress him. And so I come in, and my office mate at the time, the late, great Dave Tewan, he's also a huge Die Hard fan. And so somebody comes by and says, Mr. DeVos is here. And so I said, oh, he's here now? And so then Dave, in his best Al Powell impression, says, want a breath mint?
I think Dick DeVos is a strong contender for a future guest on the Three Martini Lunch podcast.
Yes, we'll find out. So hopefully you remember that moment from Die Hard as well. But let's move on to other good news, and that is Oracle. Even if you think it's a bit overhyped, artificial intelligence is suddenly everywhere, from self-driving cars to molecular medicine to business efficiency. If it's not in your industry yet, it's coming fast. But AI needs a lot of speed and computing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? Well, it's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud. It's called Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI.
OCI is a blazing fast and secure platform for all of your infrastructure, database, and application development needs, plus all of your AI and machine learning workloads. OCI costs 50% less for computing and 80% less for networking, so you're saving a pile of money. Thousands of businesses have already upgraded to OCI, including Vodafone, Thomson Reuters, and Suno AI.
Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies for this special offer at oracle.com/martini. That's oracle.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our mixed martini. Some good, some bad, a little bit of crazy. And Democrats, certainly in Washington, this has been their almost entire focal point over the last few weeks. And that is DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon Musk and his team of technical experts is running. They're the reason we had all these discussions about USAID. Now there's work being done at Treasury and the Department of Education, eventually the Pentagon, looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. And yesterday, we got this moment where Musk was basically having a press conference while Trump was largely silent, sitting there at the desk in the Oval Office, and Musk was explaining what was happening. And so this went on for about 25 minutes, but here's a couple of clips mashed together about Musk explaining why this work is important.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy. And we've also got to address the deficit. So we've got a $2 trillion deficit. And if we don't do something about this deficit, the country's going bankrupt. I mean, it's really astounding that the interest payments alone on the national debt exceed the Defense Department budget, which is shocking because we spend a lot of money on defense. But if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country.
So, Jim, you devoted the morning jolt to this today, looking at the positives and the negatives, basically pointing out the flaws in the Democrats' argument that Musk doesn't have any right to be doing what he's doing. You also argue for greater transparency so the public knows exactly what is happening. There needs to be a discussion about what the executive branch can unilaterally do here as opposed to things that are passed by Congress, including the appropriation of funds. But my favorite part here is the Democrats saying, unelected bureaucrats, who put them in charge of this stuff?
Yeah, and if the Biden presidency had never happened, they might have a stronger argument. But we could easily say nobody elected Ron Klain. Remember way back in the first couple of years of the Biden presidency, people jokingly called him Prime Minister Ron Klain. The idea that he was the one who was really running the government and that, Biden was just there as a figurehead. Look, the only two people who get elected in the executive branch are the president and the vice president. So you could say this for nobody elected Anthony Blinken. Nobody elected Janet. Yeah, right. Yeah. And really, nobody elected Mayorkas to run the border either. Right. This is how the system works. Now, certain jobs have cabinet confirmation. Other jobs do not. What a lot of people probably hadn't recognized that as much as DOGE sounds new and different, it's actually just the new name on the U.S. Digital Service, which was created in 2014 by Barack Obama. The purpose of the U.S. Digital Service was to go in and update the software. Basically, it was after healthcare.gov had been this absolute debacle. And they brought in a bunch of tech geniuses to say, okay, how do you get the website working? And that once healthcare.gov was working again, they said, we should probably do this for every, U.S. government agency to make sure their websites are running as efficiently and easily as they can. Let's put these people, and that's how the U.S. government, but it was always in a part of the White House. It was not something where the director of this ever had to go for Senate confirmation. So the first thing is this argument, nobody elected Elon Musk. All right. Nobody ever elected any of these people. Right, other than the president and vice president. That's a really dumb argument. Naturally, it is what the Democrats have decided to latch onto. I don't know if because it's a foreigner. I don't know if, what it is. But my favorite example was Maxine Waters. By the way, unless you remember it from right in the morning jolt. Greg, what's Maxine Waters' age?
86, only because I read it.
86. In other words, Joe Biden can call her old. Right, for perspective on it. Secondly, what year was she elected to office?
Somewhere in the 70s.
1976. So roughly, it's not that she's been in elected office for as long as you and I have been born, but just short of that. I hope you don't mind me giving people a sense of your age, right? So this is nothing new. And what's more, you might say, oh, nobody voted for Musk. Okay, but like throughout the fall, Trump was talking about, I'm going to bring on Elon Musk as an advisor. It's going to have, like, he had put out a tweet with the Department of Government Efficiency. It was an AI image of him talking about this back in August 20th. So nobody elected Musk. Okay, no, but they elected the guy who said he was going to put Musk in charge of this. So the idea, oh, you sprung this on the American. No, Trump talked about this all fall long. No one should be blindsided by this. This was about, this isn't a promise made and a promise kept. Now, with all of that said, I'm not 100% okay with everything DOGE is doing. Most notably, I think it should have a functioning website. It really doesn't. There's one that has no information on it yet. Oh, by the way, the U.S. Digital Service website, that still exists. That's still there. The way, talking about improving websites for government agencies and stuff like that. Nobody's changed any of that. DOGE has a official website that has no information on it. It has another website of the DOGE tracker, but that I believe is just somebody following Elon's X feed and all that stuff. The good news is Elon tweets about what DOGE is doing all the time. And in that sense, he's being very accountable to the public. The problem is the only way to keep up with what the government commission, advisory commission, run by Elon Musk is doing is to follow Elon Musk on the social media platform owned by Elon Musk. That's really not how the federal government is supposed to communicate to the to people. I would like to see a DOGE website that says, here's what we found, here's what we've recommended to the president, and here's what we've done. And I think if they did that, that would be great. You can still find, and they took down the USAID website. I'm not a huge fan of that because, like, if you want to know what USAID was doing, it's good to have that website. You can still find all the spending on usaspending.gov. But I just think that you don't improve transparency and disclosure to the American people by taking down websites. If they're all going to move this to the State Department, great, but I still think you should have the website for what those programs were and what they were doing. So all in all, like, they could get better at their disclosure of this. And I think that would clear up a lot of the misconceptions. I know that, you can look on Elon's Twitter feed, or X feed. Okay, but I don't know if you noticed, Elon puts a lot of stuff on X. Some of it's very serious updates as to what DOGE is doing. Some of it's wacky memes. Some of it is stuff that's, like, he retweets all kinds of stuff. And so I just kind of like, look, these are my taxpayer dollars you're trying to save. I'd like to know what you're doing. Put it all in one place. And oh, by the way, for all of this argument, that the Time cover arguing that Elon Musk is really running the country. Look, Elon should make a whole bunch of recommendations to the president. This is what an advisory commission does. And the president should, ideally at some point, President Trump should say, no, we're not going to cut that. Just to demonstrate he's not a rubber stamp. Pick the smallest one. I don't get, but just do something to say he doesn't sign off on everything that Elon does. And then I think everybody would have much less room to complain about. I do think you're right that this is going, John Yoo wrote a very good piece for us on this. There's a certain amount of, did Congress appropriate this? Are you going to, and how specifically did they appropriate this? Are you required to spend money on this project or this program versus that program? It's probably going to go to the Supreme Court. We're going to need some clearer rules of the road about when the president can say, yeah, I know Congress appropriated this money, but I don't want to spend it. It's not in line with my administration priorities. It's not in the national interest, and I think it's a waste of money. Therefore, I'm not spending it. We don't want the president to have absolute control over that. That interferes with the congressional power of the purse as laid out into the Constitution. On the other hand, the president is not supposed to be a robot that just obeys whatever Congress says. So, we're probably going to need John Roberts and company to sort all this out. That's why I call this a mixed martini, that basically there was a lot of, there's a fair criticism of DOGE, and naturally Democrats aren't making it, and they're focusing on the stupidest one. Way to go. I can't believe an organization led by Maxine Waters would come to that conclusion.
Yeah, hard to believe. Just to clarify, she wasn't elected to Congress in the 70s. I think it was the early 90s, but she was elected to
state
public office
in California.
Yeah, in California, yeah, exactly. And so it's fun to watch the Democrats light their hair on fire about this because they don't like what's being exposed here. They also just don't like the fact that this guy's working for Donald Trump. So anybody who's affiliated with Trump is automatically bad in their estimation. But Democrats like seeing how the money's actually being spent about as much as vampires like seeing sunlight. They really don't want to see how this money's being wasted. And when we find out that George Soros is apparently getting a couple $100 million, which means he's undermining law and order in major cities with our tax dollars instead of his own money, that doesn't sit too well. And the other thing I'll say is that
in the end, Soros needs money the way Musk needs a salary for DOGE.
Yes, exactly. And, as you talk about deficit reduction, you're not going to get anywhere close to where you need to go unless you actually deal with entitlements. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go after the low-hanging fruit, because waste anywhere needs to be exposed, and especially when it's a politically motivated graft like we're seeing in a lot of these things. So a lot to dig through here, and it's only getting started.
Yeah, thank you for making that point, Greg, because about a week ago I said, the stuff that DOGE is trimming, the USAID, foreign aid programs, that's not going to get you anywhere where you need to go to deal with the deficit and the debt. And everyone seemed to hear me say words I did not say and therefore you should not do it. That was not in that sentence, but somehow it just projected. People believed that. Not that I'm bitter.
Yeah, it's like looking at your credit card statement. There's the big ticket items, there's the smaller stuff, and you obviously want to deal with the big ticket items so you're not dealing with huge bills every month. But if you're dropping, $50 a month on bubble gum, you could probably get rid of that too. That's not helping the cause any, but it's not necessarily the only thing you need to focus on. But anyway, we'll keep watching.
There's a specific reason why some of these politicians hate Elon Musk. The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. Elizabeth Warren claims she doesn't accept donations from Big Pharma. Not only does she collect money, she collects more than anyone else does. And the person next in line? Bernie Sanders. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Jim, let's move to our crazy martini now. And the AP is not pleased with the Trump administration. The Associated Press basically saying that it was not granted Oval Office access to the Musk meeting yesterday. And here is the statement from executive editor Julie Pace. As a global news organization, the Associated Press informs billions of people around the world every day with factual, nonpartisan journalism. We could definitely quibble with that opening statement. But nonetheless, today, we were informed by the White House that if AP did not align its editorial standards with President Donald Trump's executive order renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, AP would be barred from accessing an event in the Oval Office. This afternoon, AP's reporter was blocked from attending an executive order signing. It is alarming that the Trump administration would punish AP for its independent journalism. Limiting our access to the Oval Office based on the content of AP's speech not only severely impedes the public access to independent news, it plainly violates the First Amendment. And so then they link to their guidance on why they still call it the Gulf of Mexico. The White House Correspondents Association has weighed in on behalf of AP as well. And so, Jim, I think the fact that they're being a stick in the mud on that policy shows that they're not as nonpartisan as they would like you to believe. But it's also not smart for the administration to do this. I mean, you could think of different examples, maybe of a leftist administration saying, well, if you don't use everyone's preferred pronouns, we're not going to let you into the briefing. We would have a pretty big problem with that, too. So there's big fish to fry in this administration. I don't think they need to be dealing with stuff this small. Yeah,
the theme of this section of the podcast is even people who annoy you can be right once in a while. As they say, broken clocks are right twice a day. Blind squirrels find an acorn. In this case, you should not be keeping the AP reporter out of White House events because you don't like the policy set by the people running the organization or the senior editors. I don't even know who the White House correspondent for AP is. But I can tell you, that guy doesn't set the policy for what do we call the body of water in between Florida and Texas, right? So stop giving him grief now. Now, AP could say the Gulf of Mexico, or as President Trump prefers it to be called, the Gulf of America, or the Gulf of America, the body of water that most Americans think of as the Gulf of America. Like, there are ways you could work around this to say that President Trump calls it this. Your road atlas in your glove compartment is going to call it that, right? I know Google Maps changed. And I'd be very curious. I haven't had a chance. If you're in Mexico and you use Google Maps, does it still say the same thing? Is Google just saying, we don't want any grief from the Trump administration? Sure, it's the Gulf of America today or something like that. But all in all, I think when you're an administration, as much as you may hate the media, you need them to write about what you're doing. Like you know, I understand they want to diversify the voices in there. You want to bring in more people in the White House press. Fine, I have no problem with any of that. But you got to pick your battles. And this seems like a really ticky-tacky issue. It's a really ticky-tacky issue to fight over. Like, this is really your biggest beef you've had with AP coverage of the Trump administration so far? That they're using the term Gulf of Mexico? Really? They haven't done anything worse. If so, it's an amazing triumph. My suspicion is that there are much bigger fish to fry, lifted out of the Gulf of America. And that now, really, I don't know how much time and energy you want to squabble over this stuff. AP sends out their stuff to every major media institution in the country, every website, all that kind of stuff. So you probably would rather have them in the room covering what Trump is saying than not in the room. I mean, I know you say, people will just pick it up from the Reuters feed or from Agence France Presse or any of these other ones. Okay, but it just seems like a very petty and small ball, not seeing the forest for the trees move on the part of the White House. And it just, I don't. And I'm just also not, this is kind of also one of the reasons I have a beef with the tariffs, where you're angry at Canada, so you're going to make life harder for U.S. automakers. I really like addressing your complaint to the person who actually controls it. And the AP White House reporter does not control what they label bodies of water.
Yeah, I don't think this is worth a sanction like that. I do not at all mind the fact that they've gone away from the tradition of the AP, or back in the day, Helen Thomas at UPI automatically gets the first question. I'm totally fine spreading all that stuff around. But, we do have a First Amendment, and they're allowed to report as they wish and take the blowback. They can take the blowback from the public and even public statements from the president for not calling it what he wants to, but actually sanctioning them is going too far.
Let me also point out, when people say, Jim, Greg, don't, are you saying that all elected officials have to allow every media organization into every briefing? Not necessarily, but in the past, it's been seen as, if not the death penalty, then the only thing you did extraordinary. I remember way back. This is the late 90s, Mesozoic era. We ride dinosaurs to Capitol Hill to cover Congress. And I'm at Congressional Quarterly, and Congressional Quarterly had by the way, ironically, almost nothing Congressional Quarterly published came out quarterly. A lot of it was weekly, a lot of it was monthly, some of it was daily. And Greg, to take you way back, this is when working on the internet was called new media, right?
Uh-huh.
And everything else was old media. I enjoyed teasing other people about in other departments about that, but they did a cover story on Tom DeLay, and the headline was Greg, what was Tom DeLay's nickname?
The Hammer.
Right? Okay, so does anybody doubt that he warranted the nickname the Hammer? Otherwise, he was going to be the Exterminator, right? So that because he previously worked in pest control. But so the headline was, "To a hammer, the world looks like a nail." And it was a profile of DeLay. And it certainly wasn't flattering. I don't think it was wildly unfair, but it was, playing up on this image of him as the tough guy and the enforcer and the one that nobody in the House Republican caucus, so DeLay did not invite Congressional Quarterly to the briefings after that for, I don't know how long it was, but it just kind of struck me as wow, you do that when you really are PO'd at a media organization. It's better if you've got a case of them being unethical, case of them reporting something that's not true. Calling it the Gulf of Mexico is really not the worst. It's not even the worst thing AP probably did that day.
Jim, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you haven't already, and not only on the podcast platform, but also on YouTube. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday. Join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.